welcome to everybody who's joining us at this Cultivating Radical Kindness webinar this lunchtime. We've got a great toolkit on our website for a range of tools, resources, and all the fantastic stories that we've been gathering over the last 9 months. Firstly, I'm Jo Broadwood. I'm the Chief Exec of Belong, the Cohesion Integration Network, and I'm very pleased to be chairing this event this lunchtime. Radical kindness. I'm really delighted that we're here today talking about radical kindness. This project grew out of our Beyond Us and Them research study, which is a longitudinal research project done in partnership with Belong and the University of Kent, looking at what the impact of COVID-19 has been on individuals and communities, and particularly the kind of relationships between us. And this project grew out of that because early on it was really clear that there was this huge and really inspiring uplift in community and connection and support in communities. But as a result of lockdown, the opportunities for connections to be made across difference were severely curtailed. And, you know, radical kindness, which is the kindness which connects across difference, is one of the most important ways of breaking down prejudice and stereotypes and forging empathy and deeper connections. And I think in a society which many feel has become increasingly disconnected and divided, those connections across difference are really important. So with the support of Spirit of 2012, we wanted to profile all of those inspiring people and organisations doing radical kindness throughout the pandemic. And also to find out more about what are the conditions that are necessary in order for radical kindness to thrive. And in order to do that, we've drawn on some of our learnings, considerable learnings from our research project about connections across difference, but we've also drawn on a whole bank of stories and examples that we've collected over the last 9 months. So today we're launching the paper, Cultivating Radical Kindness, on those conditions, and we've got a really fantastic panel who are going to respond to the paper. We're delighted to welcome Ruth Hollis, CEO of Spirit of 2012, and I mean, Spirit of 2012 really epitomises that idea of kindness, ensuring the legacy of volunteering and community spirit that was epitomised by the Olympic Games, that it lives on in our communities. So it's brilliant to have Ruth here. Ben Thurman from Carnegie Trust UK, and the brilliant work of Carnegie Trust UK, who have long been arguing for kindness to be put at the heart of public policy making and have done some really brilliant work on this. And I hope that Ben refers to that when he speaks later. And Sale Suleiman from Corderdale Council. And I was just saying before we began the webinar that I think it was very bold of Corderdale Council to put kindness and resilience as key planks of their local strategy. And really, really pleased to be hearing from Sale about his response to the paper. So really looking forward to hearing from our panellists later. But first of all, we're going to hear from Kaya Davis-Hayon and Christine Cox from Belong. And Kaya and Christine have been very much leading on this project, and they're going to share what we've learned about radical kindness and some of the stories we've been gathering.
Thanks very much, Jo. I'm just going to share my screen. Can everybody see that okay? Yeah.
Yes.
Great. So Chrissy and I are going to talk to you today about Belong's Radical Kindness project, which, as Jo said, we've been conducting over the past 9 months or so. And the project is funded by Spirit of 2012, and it's sought to capture examples of radical kindness. And I'll go into detail about the definition shortly, but we're kind of defining it as activities or programs that bridge differences between groups and forge stronger, more compassionate social connections. So the research, as Jo mentioned, draws on findings from Beyond Us and Them, Societal Cohesion in the Context of COVID-19, which is a major research project funded by the Nuffield Foundation and conducted by Belong in collaboration with the University of Kent. And the aim of this project is to understand the impact of COVID-19 on social cohesion across the UK. And we've been conducting this project for around a year now. We've been conducting various forms of data collection, such as surveys, focus groups, and one-to-ones. And over the course of the research, we've had the opportunity to speak to people from all over the UK about the kind, thoughtful, and often selfless gestures and actions that they've carried out during the COVID-19 pandemic. And we've been really, really inspired by these. And so some of these examples that we've collected, we've shared in a series of 11's webinars, which some of you may have had the pleasure of attending. They were run by Chrissy. And we've spoken to people from lots of different organisations and areas about the things that they've done to embed radical kindness into their workplaces, into their lives, and into their communities. And over the course of these conversations, we've learned a lot about the conditions that need to be in place for radical kindness to thrive in many different environments. And that's what we're going to be talking to you about today. So I'm going to outline some of the key conditions, and Chrissy is going to share some lovely best practice examples and case studies with you. So we've already given you a kind of brief definition of radical kindness, but I want to expand on this a little bit before we go into the conditions. So what exactly is radical kindness, and why is it so important? Well, at Belong, we believe that radical kindness is a form of kindness that moves beyond situational, random, or relational acts of kindness, and that addresses our need to connect with and care for others. So we define radical kindness, and I have this definition on the slide, as a type of kindness that reaches out across differences and becomes transformative, even though it might involve some form of disruption or discomfort along the way, especially when it challenges institutional and structural barriers. So for us, radical kindness is really about addressing the root causes of separation and segregation, and about bringing people together from different backgrounds. It's distinct from random or relational acts of kindness, which tend to be carried out towards people who we perceive as belonging to the same groups as us. Instead, radical kindness refers to those acts and activities that very actively and intentionally seek to build bridges across differences, to develop solidarity and shared ground, and to promote social connection between different groups and communities. So as I've said, over the course of the project, we've pulled together a set of 10 conditions for embedding radical kindness into our lives, workplaces, and communities. We believe that these conditions work best when they're implemented together. They're designed to be applicable across different sectors, and they're shot through with a really acute awareness of how structural inequalities and discrimination can prevent people from accessing resources and experiencing the same level of rights. We think that everybody should play a part in encouraging radical kindness, and that everybody can play a part in encouraging radical kindness. We think that radical kindness can range from very simple gestures to much more structural change. And we're going to share some lovely examples with you today, but if you have any examples from your own practice or your own lives that you'd like to share, we'd love to hear from you as well. So just pop them into the chat function. So I'm now going to run through the 10 conditions that need to be in place for radical kindness to thrive. And I'm going to start with a condition that focuses on the importance of place. So at Belong, we believe that place really matters, and that strategies to address cohesion in different places will need to be different. But we think that it's crucial for all places to cultivate a kind and connected local infrastructure that offers opportunities for cross-sector collaboration. And I'm going to pass to Chrissy now to share one example from our research.
Yeah, so Calderdale, because it's had the floods in the past and also within the pandemic, it has absolutely been brilliant in bringing people together. But the key thing, and you'll hear from the wonderful Jan Limer from Calder Community Cares in a moment, but about that connecting the local authority and all the different organisations and voluntary groups, and that really has been a key in that area. So if you could play that one, Kai, that'd be great.
For us, it was the kindness of wherever we turned, it was a yes. Wherever we asked for help, it was a yes. Wherever we needed something, it was a yes. So yes, we set up and the community came forward to support us. But Hebden Royd Town Council, Community Foundation for Calderdale, Voluntary Action for Calderdale, we wouldn't have been able to achieve as much as we have done without people opening doors for us. helping us with our learning curve, providing us with training and DBS support and advice. So even now learning about debt management, we're understanding as a new charity that often people are dropping into poverty, through poverty, because of debt. So we refer on some of the people we support to Noah's Ark, where they provide debt management support. And once you can start to help people with their debt, they actually are able to feed themselves better. So the whole thing is really complex. But the whole network within our area, the voluntary organisations, charities, the local authority, council officers all working together, I think is also an act of kindness.
Brilliant. So that's a lovely example from Calderdale. I always love hearing Janet talk about the work that they've done there. The next condition is to support social mixing in order to develop positive attitudes about others and to tackle prejudice. So the research evidence consistently shows that social mixing is one of the most effective ways of tackling prejudice and distrust between groups. And in areas where people might lack confidence to reach out across differences and do bridging work, we think it's vital for programmes and structures to be in place that support social mixing. So I'm going to pass to Chrissy now, who's going to give another example from our research.
Yes, thank you. So we've got a brilliant example, which is Springboard's Accelerate programme, which is fantastic. And that brings together young people from all different backgrounds across the whole of Ireland to challenge prejudice and discrimination and just get people in a room having dialogue with one another. So here is Georgia and Caleb from Accelerate to tell you a little bit more about what they've been doing.
They definitely include a wide range of people, like people from East Belfast, the others here from East Belfast, even though we are from the same place and live quite near. We're all from very different backgrounds. When we come together as a large group from like north, south, east and west, I think there's still that very wide range, and I think it definitely exposed me to things which I would have never have experienced before. But I think that was good though, because that challenged how I thought and challenged how I was, and ultimately it made me a far better person.
Where else would you get that range of people in a room to talk about something if it wasn't engineered and facilitated? Having all those kinds of people together, and especially coming from the background that we all do, like I come from a Catholic background, and there was people talking about their experience as a Protestant, how they want to celebrate the 12th, and just the kind of culture that's like, you would need to get into like the conversation about culture to really get there, and it would need to be facilitated, and it would need to be there would need to be a blanket of respect that everyone has to adhere to go to it. That kind of opened my eyes in a way that you don't have to agree with everybody, you don't have to have the same background, you don't have to get on the same level, but it's good to listen. It's good to know that they're there and they have a completely different life to you, but that's okay. It opens your mind a bit, makes you kinder, makes you feel more, and also gives you respect for that blanket of respect. Getting in a room and talking about things that are difficult, it definitely, like, I thought I was open-minded, I thought I kind of got over all that kind of crap, but I hadn't, and I realized that there, and that's good. You know, you don't have to know it all, like you don't know it all. There's so many cultures, so many different people, but that you're willing to listen, and the respect is the main thing that you want to bring there, no matter what.
That's such a great example of bringing people together across differences. So thirdly, we believe it's really important to engage with underrepresented and minority groups and communities in a participatory, non-hierarchical way. So research on intergroup relations shows that progress is made when participants hold each other in mutual respect and interact with equal status. And one way of achieving this and of moving away from models of kindness that might appear quite patronising or condescending is to ensure that structures and programmes are in place that empower underrepresented groups and communities to partake in decision-making processes. And that image is from a lovely project that People United ran between Syrian refugee women and women from a local community. The fourth condition is about tackling misinformation. So we believe it's crucial to tackle misinformation to support more trusting relations between individuals communities and the state. So many of our partners have worked collaboratively with different sectors, as well as with community leaders and residents, to ensure that accurate information reaches people on the ground and misinformation doesn't spread. And this has obviously been really crucial during the COVID-19 pandemic. Another key condition that needs to be in place for radical kindness to thrive is the encouragement of active social engagement and of the agency and empowerment of citizens. So it's really important to provide opportunities for people, and particularly young people and groups that might not typically engage, to feel empowered as citizens to participate in democratic and civic processes. And so here I'll pass to Chrissy again, who's going to share another example with us. Oh, I think you're muted there, Chrissy.
Sorry, we wanted to share here Anne Mendilingis from the Hornbeam Centre and Cafe. And there's a brilliant audiogram here of a comment from her about the importance actually of engaging children and young people and the empowerment for them going forward, which is really key. So if you could play that, that'd be great.
I think it's very important. Kids learn by example. So seeing what the parents are doing and how people are standing together, going on cycling trips with the mom and dad when they pick up the food, just little examples like that, and having opportunity to take food to schools that they know will end up in a food bank for people who don't have access to free food. It just cultivates something and they feel valued by that. They can make a contribution. So it builds their self-esteem and their self-worth in knowing that I can make a difference, doesn't matter how small, and contributing to the bigger picture and the well-being of the community. I think it's immensely important.
And then we also believe that it's important to promote arts, culture and sports programs that encourage social mixing and break down barriers between groups. So arts, culture and sports programs can increase interactions between groups who might not otherwise mix, and can act as a springboard for generating increased trust and connection. And I think Chrissy has another example to share with us here.
I do, and it's important to say actually that we had loads of examples of the use of arts and sport over this time, which has been absolutely fantastic, and they've all been really inspirational. But I think this one really kind of puts the nail on the head, which is from the wonderful Fozia Nazim, who runs the Hop on Yorkshire, and she told us about her experience of the power of sport to encourage social mixing and break down some of those barriers.
What we do is when we go out for a ride, everybody will bring a little bit of something. So it's not so much how many miles we're doing, it's how much time we're spending with each other. So we'll stop off, we'll have a bit of banter on the ride as well, but then we'll stop off at a coffee place, get out what we've got, and share our different types of food. Everyone talks about their cultural things. And it's like that thing where white privileged, you think some people will think that, but you've got that image, that person there, but you would normally look and think that, but she's sat with you and she's talking to you, and then you've got the niqabi, you know, the one with the whole full dress on with just the eyes showing. So she's there and it's like, oh, they're more reserved and quiet, they're not going to be, you know, open. You know, I didn't think that this would work because we're completely different spectrums of communities that we wouldn't normally even probably chat to. And they're sat here and they're like family, and all of a sudden that barrier's broken down. Same with one bunch of ladies they said that they only ever wanted to ride within this hall. From that we said, what if we went on the Greenway? What do you think about going on the Greenway? And it's like, oh, I don't know, what will people think? I says, doesn't matter, people are going to think nothing. So eventually we slowly took them on there. So you can imagine, you know, you've got a bunch of women with all this stuff on with so when I was at the front, obviously I'm telling people, because they're a bit, you know, wobbly and stuff. So I just pre-warned people just in case. I say, I apologise if anyone is slightly out of line with the riding. They're just all new and we're just taking it easy. So we did that as we went along, and as you spoke to the people that were walking maybe, telling them that, and they thought, oh gosh, this is great. So they thought it was really nice to see that because it wasn't something they'd normally see. So then they'd start cheering them on and saying stuff as they were going past. We got positive stuff. they came back from that with a huge buzz. I'm not saying there's not any racism and stuff out there. There is odds and sods from both sides, but we just wanted to kind of break it down somehow through sport, is just break those barriers down and just make it, I don't know, a nicer place.
And then the next few conditions centre around people and knowledge. So we believe that it's really important to support and develop the lived and specialist knowledge of local people and local organisations. For us, radical kindness is about forming and developing relationships across difference that prioritise the knowledge of the receiver as much as that of the giver. It therefore follows that radical kindness will thrive in situations where the specialist knowledge of local people is brought together with sector-specific expertise. It's also important to promote diverse leadership. So leadership and senior management teams should be diverse and inclusive and should reflect the demographics of their workforces or communities. Alongside this, we need to make sure that we're creating kind, inclusive cultures that make everybody feel valued and welcome. Different groups and different communities face different barriers to exclusion, and therefore different forms of action need to be taken. Sometimes organisations and institutions need to develop strategies that aim to actively challenge and improve existing inequalities in society. And then finally, we believe a fundamental condition that needs to be in place for radical kindness to thrive is for us to develop local and national policy with radical kindness at its core. So policy on social cohesion needs to be underpinned by a focus on tackling structural inequalities and deep-rooted discriminations. It needs to be underpinned by a focus on encouraging kindness that bridges difference and that actively strengthens positive pro-social behaviours. So I'll now pass over to Chrissy, who's going to conclude and launch a quick poll before we hand over to our panellists.
So our question is, with these conditions in mind, how different might our society be if these conditions of radical kindness were embedded into our institutions, our government, our politics, business, social and civic lives? And we may listen more to one another, perhaps, and seek to understand others and their experiences more. Perhaps we would find a way to disagree in a more honest and healthy way through open dialogue. We might treat each other with greater respect and dignity based on our shared humanity and maybe not from their background or where they came from. And there might be more of a sense that we are all truly in this together and that no one can advance and thrive unless we all do. As we emerge from the COVID-19 pandemic and begin the process of healing and recovery, it will be more important than ever to harness the capacity for radical kindness that has flourished during this pandemic and ensure that it takes root in our workplaces, community and society. We have been so inspired by the many examples of radical kindness that we've collected over the course of this project, and we're immensely grateful to all of the individuals, organisations, businesses and institutions that have shared their stories with us. All of them are cultivating radical kindness and fostering deeper and more meaningful connections in their streets, workplaces, businesses and communities. We're going to leave you with Shayla from Bradford for Everyone and her take on radical kindness while we ask you to fill out a poll that Alex is going to launch for me now. So this poll has got 2 questions. The first question, you can check as many of those boxes as you like. And the second question, if you can just respond yes, no, maybe, and expand on that answer in the chat for us, please. That would be fantastic. Thank you.
Simple acts of kindness we do on a daily basis, saying hello to people, opening doors for them, saying thank you. But radical kindness is something which is beyond that, which is the next step further, which is around whatever we see, whatever we say is rooted into kindness. And that comes when we start seeing other people through the lens of trust, empathy, compassion. And that's where we forget if people are different from us.
Thank you so much, Kaya and Chrissy. I love that final quote from Sheila. It's such a lovely example of radical kindness and why it's important. So we launched the poll. Can you just let me know, when are we getting the results of the poll? Do we do that now, or do we do it at the beginning of the Q&A?
Beginning of the Q&A, Jo.
Okay, so we'll share the results of the poll at the beginning of the Q&A. There's just a message here in the chat. Just let me see. There's been a problem with the poll. Yeah, so please, if you did complete it earlier, can you complete it again? Because there's been a glitch with it. So can you, if you did press one of the buttons earlier when it came out, can you make sure you vote in the latest version? Thank you very much. Okay, we're going to hear from Ruth Hollis now. Ruth Hollis is Chief Exec of Spirit of 2012, and I'm going to hand over to Ruth. So camera's off, I think.
Sorry, is my camera on? Can you? Yeah, great, thank you. It's really difficult actually to follow those brilliant examples and films, and if you haven't watched those films yet, I would very much recommend sitting down with a cup of tea later and watching them, because they're absolutely inspirational, and I'll draw on some of that in my response. So firstly, immense thanks to Jo and the team. I was really delighted that Spirit of 2012 was able to support this important project, and it's vital, I think, that we do tell the story of some of those acts of kindness over the last year, which has been very difficult for everybody, and not just acts of kindness between individual people, but acts of kindness that have crossed those social divides. So whether that's age, ethnicity, faith, geography, and we've heard a really eloquent presentation of that by Kaya and Claire. So thank you very much. And I want to start by thanking Belong really for initiating this and for the excellent work they've done on the report and capturing all those moving stories. I particularly like the Calder community care example, and just that energy she brings to bringing people together. And one of the films you didn't see, which is from My Pockets, an arts organisation working in Hull and East Yorkshire, and last year we funded them to do a project called Monster Extraction, which is a project that brings a diverse group of women and girls together who are united by caring responsibilities, but stretch from 8 to 80, all different social backgrounds, and they come together to make music to, I guess, to kind of exercise the demons they think about caring, and that's why it's called Monster Extraction. The report also highlights our partners Jo Cox Foundation, Springboard Opportunities, both of whom are doing fantastic work to bridge divides in their communities. So what I want to do is give some thoughts on the report and reflect a bit on what it means for organisations funding, commissioning, developing projects that bring people together. But firstly, I wanted to reflect on how timely this report is, and I think it's really timely for 3 reasons. Firstly, it showed us that COVID provided an opportunity for communities to come together. But as Jo said at the start, coming together across difference and bringing different communities together was more difficult. And we also know that COVID entrenched some divides, and this is something we'll all have to need to work hard on to address in the coming months and years. Secondly, it's also 20 years since we saw the violent unrest in Oldham, the 3 nights of riots, which was followed by a long period of mutual tension in the community, violence set against a context of economic decline, far-right activity, high levels of residential segregation, which the Cantle report termed parallel lives. And there's a really good podcast at the moment on Radio 4 if you want to find out more about that. Those riots and subsequent violence in Bradford, Burnley and Leeds served as a real wake-up call, showing that more action was needed in many of our towns and cities to encourage meaningful contact across social divides. And the recent sectarian events in Northern Ireland and Glasgow and the anti-Semitic events in London this weekend make it not just timely, but even more pressing that we have these conversations. So I think this is a really great time to reflect on what we have and haven't achieved since the unrest of 2001, and to make sure these stories are heard now, and that we really seek to understand those conditions that make them successful to help shape work that centres around radical kindness for the future. The final reason I think this is so timely is that Spirit was set up to use the power of events to bring people together and help bridge divides. We saw this in London 2012 and other major events like Hull City of Culture, where people came together to volunteer with people across their cities to make the event a success. There's a real importance for events in developing civic pride, of giving people hope and optimism, and an excuse to bring people together and give them an opportunity to connect. 2022 is going to be an absolutely bumper year of major events for the UK. We've got the Commonwealth Games in Birmingham, the latter half of Coventry City of Culture, Festival UK, Platinum Jubilee, the anniversary of the BBC. So there's a real opportunity to use these events and the activities that will develop around them to bridge divides and bring people together. So the first thing I wanted to say was it's really timely. The second thing I want to reflect on, and Kaya mentioned this briefly, is the need for building connection to be intentional. At Spirit, we fund projects that use sport, arts and community action, activities that bring people together in pursuit of common interests because they provide an important opportunity for sustained social contact. And it's that sustained social contact that leads to friendships and is more effective than fleeting interactions in breaking down us and them issues. It also helps us tackle another one of our big policy issues, loneliness. So it's a real double benefit for us. Throughout all of our projects, we see the power of a cup of tea, the power of downtime to chat and building a sense of belonging and being valued for people taking part. We know social contact is key, but I was also pleased to see the report highlight the importance of equality between people. In projects, this means equality between people as participants, but also as volunteers and leaders. Bridging social contact across divides helps break down those us and them mindsets, where people strongly identify with their in-group and may hold negative views about others. It can help reduce stereotyping and prejudice, as well as developing greater empathy, trust, and shared more in common identities. We know, and it's been highlighted in the report, that sport and the arts can play a powerful role in bringing people together and bridging those divides, but this absolutely needs to be intentional, not left to chance, and it needs to be supported and funded. In the film clips that you saw at the beginning, you heard from Georgia, who said, where would we go to get the range of people in the room if it wasn't engineered and facilitated? She talked about being facilitated to do really deep listening and created that fantastic notion of a blanket of respect, which I hope we will take forward. If you haven't watched all of the films, I really recommend you do, because they're absolutely fantastic examples. Another example from our own projects is Get Out, Get Active, which is a project we fund with Sport England and the London Marathon Community Trust that brings disabled and non-disabled people together through physical activity and volunteering. Equality is really important in that project. It's founded on the principles of being active together, not active separately. And as a result of it, 65% of participants told us that their perception of disabled people was more positive as a result of taking part in the project. We know that perceptions can be shifted when we play together, when we work together, when we volunteer together, and we all need to create the conditions to make that happen. I think there's a real call for all of us involved in funding, commissioning, designing projects that make social contact and social mixing intentional, and to actively support and facilitate that blanket of respect. And what that means is that we have to be prepared for projects to work in a deep and sustained way with people and build that social contact time into the project. And the reality is this can mean fewer participants and often higher cost for projects. But we think the potential outcomes that you can benefit justify this potentially higher cost. Breaking Boundaries is another Spirit of 2012 project that aims to bring young people together, young people, their families, their communities through cricket and their shared love of the game. And that's as players, spectators or volunteers. The project started by developing a really deep understanding of the communities they were working in. And to do this, they needed to work in relatively small areas, often at ward level, to make that feasible. As a funder, we think good data collection and reflective learning is an essential part of projects that aim to bring people together. It's important to collect evidence about the impact projects have made in their local communities, and that needs to start with detailed beneficiary data and an understanding of who is, and critically who isn't in the room, and how you overcome the barriers that might prevent them from engaging. The recent Beyond Us and Them report that Joe talked about at the beginning has shown how a comparatively small investment from, in that instance, the integration action areas, made a really positive difference to levels of trust and COVID volunteering last year. And I'm sure Sale will talk more about the role of local authorities shortly. But I think there's a challenge to think about how funding works locally to support local civil society and faith infrastructure to do this work. Spirit of 2012 will continue to support projects that provide the basis for new friendship and sustained social contact, and we're really looking forward to what next year brings in terms of all those events to do that. One final thing I wanted to flag is that in amongst all these brilliant stories, we do know that it's really challenging work, and I think we need to factor that into planning and design. Not every bridging initiative that Spirit 2012 has funded has achieved its aim, but we do think it's worth trying. So the fact that everybody needs to play a part in bridging social divides was a really clear recommendation of both the Cantle and Ritchie reports 20 years ago. This has got to include central and local government and all our institutions, whether that's education, business, sport, the arts, faith and civil society organisations. It also includes funders like Spirit of 2012 and everybody in the community, members of the public, all of us here. Volunteering or taking time to talk to a neighbour are things we can all do to help us build a more connected community. The report, I think, is a really important tool for organisations working to bridge social divides, to showcase what they do and make the case for government funding and for greater aligned strategy. Belong's new report demonstrates clearly why bridging social contact and bringing communities together is so important and so timely. In the last 2 decades since the Oldham riots, we've had lots of reviews and reports, but so far none of the 4 nations of the UK has published an integration strategy looking across their communities. And I think this report highlights why that's so crucial and so crucial now. So thank you.
Thank you, Ruth. That was such a great response, and just lots and lots in there to think about. Really, just that point about funders and commissioners maybe needing to have to sort of understand that it might mean fewer participants and higher costs, but the bonds will be deeper, I think is a really well-made point. And I think referencing you know, the Cantle report of 20 years ago and where we are now, again, I think that's you know, thinking about where we are now, I think is in relation to that is a really sort of helpful kind of talking point for us. So thank you very much for that, Ruth. We have actually lost Sale, which is he's got terrible internet connection. We're trying to get him back. If you have questions about anything that Ruth has shared, then please do put them in the Q&A function, and we'll have a chance to ask them when we come to the Q&A. In the meantime, I'm really delighted to hand over to Ben Thurman from the Carnegie Trust UK.
Thanks very much, Jo, and thanks to everyone at Belong. It's really, really lovely to be here and be part of this event today. As you said, I work for the Carnegie UK Trust, and we're an organisation that exists to improve the well-being of people across the UK and Ireland. And for the last 5 or so years, we've been thinking about kindness as a way to talk about how we deliver this mission. And that's because we know that, you know, the relationships that we have with people in our neighbourhoods and communities, and the quality of their interactions with organisations and services are absolutely fundamental to our well-being as individuals and as a society. And speaking about this for the last few years, it would normally be at this point where I go into a very well-rehearsed spiel about why we think kindness is important and why it's not just a soft and fluffy nice to have, but, you know, something that's at the very heart of social justice. So it's quite refreshing today that I feel like I don't really need to do that, because I think Carnegie's been on a very similar kindness journey to the one that Belong's been going on. And that's one that's focused on moving beyond the sort of random acts of kindness to something that's much more transformational, that really sort of seeks to change the way that we live and work together. So with that sort of background, I've really enjoyed reading and rereading the paper over the last few days, and I think my overall reflections with that framing and the examples in there really make it clear that kindness isn't always simple and easy to do. You know, if we understand kindness as something that asks of us to reach across difference, that can feel risky and difficult. It brings us out of our comfort zone as people and as organisations. And really sort of challenges and disrupts the way that we do things. I think the other thing that was really clearly articulated in the paper was the way that COVID has highlighted the structural inequalities in society, and not just in terms of health and economic outcomes, but social and community too. And of course, these are all quite intimately interconnected. But radical kindness can help to change that and to challenge inequality, to break down some of those barriers and transform our relationships with each other. So it's just, yeah, really fantastic to see people sort of coalescing around this idea and practice, and personally very grateful for the chance to have a few minutes just to reflect back some of the things that felt important to me reading this paper. And there were lots, but in the interest of time, I'm just going to focus on sort of 3 things that really jumped out. The first is that so many of the conditions outlined in the report are about the places and spaces that we have to come together. And that's been a really central theme of our work on kindness at Carnegie, that people need welcoming places to stop, to have a chat, to bump into each other. And that it's in these spaces where sort of connections happen, where people feel like they have permission to be kind, that that things can happen. And I think it's really still salient that in a year when we've been sort of cut off from lots of our traditional gathering places, like the cafes, community centres, hairdressers, bus stops, that this thing about place and space has still been of vital importance. And we've seen all of these creative examples that are woven throughout this the Belong report, of people using different digital tools, community arts, all sorts of other things to create the space and conditions for connection and relationships. And that made me sort of look ahead to a time when these kinds of spaces and activities might be at risk because of funding and because of all the other pressures bound up in recovery. And so it feels kind of doubly important that we are able to tell these stories and to articulate really clearly why investing in this sort of broad infrastructure of kindness really does matter. So that's the first thing. The second thing that I sort of noticed reading the report is that the way that it blends these stories of kind of varied and creative responses to the pandemic with a really clear focus on social mixing, on engaging with underrepresented groups, encouraging participation, as you'd expect. But I think seeing those 2 things together really sort of highlighted to me that there's no one right way to do this, and radical kindness really requires this kind of rich diversity of opportunities for connection and participation, and that all of these will be different according to the place that we're in. And I think particularly in light of what we've learned over the past 12 months about some of the barriers to participation in volunteering and mutual aid for particular groups, I think this sort of really challenges us to think about whether our communities and society really do provide the right opportunities for everyone to engage. But equally, something that I sort of was thinking reading through this paper, it sort of asks us to rethink the way that we currently understand and recognise different forms of social action and different forms of community kindness. And a lot of our conversations at Carnegie with communities over the past year have highlighted just the real sort of fundamental importance of those informal acts of neighbourly help and support. Quite sort of low level things that quite often don't get picked up, certainly in our sort of national conversations about social capital, but that nevertheless really make a difference to people's lives. And so I think when I'm thinking the future about how we encourage social action among particular groups that we might perceive to be less engaged, I think there's a need to start by asking, what's there that's strong that we're perhaps not fully appreciating. And that means deeply listening to communities, something that's come up in some of the examples already today, and building from there. And that's, as I say, something that I'll definitely take away with me after this event. And the third thing that I just found really powerful was quite succinctly and eloquently encapsulated in a quote that we've already heard today from Jan in Calderdale, so she must be getting something right, but I think worth repeating. She said that wherever we asked for help, it was a yes. And I think that approach, that enabling environment of giving people the tools and permission to act is something that feels like it's been allowed to flourish over the past 12 months, and certainly in different pockets of our work as well. And before COVID, we heard about so much that just didn't happen because we had this sort of collective fear of getting things wrong. But then over the last year, driven by this sort of necessity of a crisis, we've seen what can be achieved when we're led by kindness rather than by risk. And now the challenge in some places is more thinking about how we can grow and sustain this into the future. So those were 3 short reflections on sort of what felt important and urgent from my reading of the paper around valuing places and spaces, creating sort of and understanding different opportunities for participation, and just starting with yes. But I think as well as the conditions themselves, I think possibly my lasting impression from this and all the other content that Belong's put together this week is just the power of storytelling. Definitely the national context is important, as are organizational structures and cultures, and it's good to see all of these reflected in the report. But it starts with people creating space for kindness in their communities, and from there through telling their stories and just sort of building this shared narrative about what we value as a society. And so that's why it's been so energizing to read this report for me, and why I'm so pleased to be part of this discussion with you all today, and looking forward to hearing what you all think. Thanks very much.
Thanks so much, Ben. Really thoughtful reflections there. Just to say, we have very sadly lost Sale. So I'm really, really sorry about that, because I think Sale would have provided a really unique perspective from a local authority perspective. So I think we're going to move into the Q&A right away. But before that, we're going to share the poll results. So if we can share the poll results, please. So this is really interesting. Which of these conditions have been most helpful in cultivating radical kindness in your work, lives and communities? So I have to say that in a quick reading, it looks like encourage active social engagement and support the agency and empowerment of citizens has been as the 2 equal top, if you like, that and create kind and inclusive cultures that make everyone feel valued and welcomed. It's really interesting, actually. One of the findings in our Beyond Us and Them research was that in the 6 local areas we were surveying that had social cohesion and integration strategies, volunteering was twice as high in those areas as elsewhere. And that real sense of, creating local areas where people really care about each other and connect with each other. I think volunteering was a real indicator of that in those places. So that's really interesting. Please do put your questions in the Q&A, and can I ask the panel to turn their cameras on, please? Thank you. So we've got just 20 minutes for questions, and there's one here from Jane from the Cares family, and she was just reflecting on the presentation actually, and the final statement from Shayla, which was seeing others through the lens of trust, empathy and compassion. And her question is that when people are unaware of other cultures and maybe hold prejudices, then where do you start? Which is a really, really good question. And I'm actually going to go, I think I'll go to Chrissy first, because I think Chrissy will find this question more straightforward maybe than other panelists, partly because a lot of Chrissy's work has been about work where you bridge divides, particularly where people are either disconnected from each other or actively divided from each other. So where do you start, Chrissy?
Well, the challenge is always getting them into a single space, but I'm just thinking about a lot of the community dialogue work that I've done, where you bring people together and you might draw them in with food, which is always a great way, and you then facilitate a process where there may be statements like a yes, no, maybe statement. You start to get them to engage in a conversation, and actually I think in pretty much every one that I've done, the beginning is always really sticky, because people are uncomfortable with being around people that they feel are very different to them. But actually within about half an hour, you start to see all those little groups of people chatting to each other, discovering commonality. And it goes back to the Jo Cox comment about we have more in common than that which divides us. And I think that's my experience over many years of working in different communities. As long as you facilitate that process to bring people together, that magic will start to happen. And even if you have some people that are very sort of stubbornly stuck in their position, over a period of time they will move slowly across that room and there will be connections made. And that's really how it starts. It's open conversation.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point. And I guess I think also there's quite a difference between communities that are just disconnected in that they don't have very much knowledge or information about each other and maybe haven't had much interaction, and communities where there maybe is active prejudice by one group against another, or there's active, you know, something in the local area or local place which is there's an active disagreement about. So there's, I think, you know, probably in the second example, you'd probably be much more careful about building all those relationships before you even try to get them into the same space with each other. But yeah, absolutely. Ruth, I don't know whether you've got any thoughts on that.
I think the same as Chrissy. I mean, I do think the arts and sport can be a really incredibly powerful mechanism of bringing people together around a shared purpose or shared passion that they might not know that they share. So whether you bring people together to intentionally talk to them about cohesion, or whether you bring people together and actually get them working towards a similar goal or similar purpose, and almost do the kind of the cohesion stuff by stealth around the outside of that. We often talk with Breaking Boundaries about the power of the families sitting around the ground just chatting about how great their kids are at sport, and actually things like that are a massive leveler. That Chrissy's absolutely right. If you can get people into the same space and get them sharing that purpose and just talking about normal everyday stuff, I think that's how you start to kind of break down some of those barriers.
Ben, would you like to?
Yeah, thanks. No, I was just sort of smiling at that idea of doing it by stealth, which I think feels like resonates quite a lot with some of our thinking about kindness, and how, especially in the early work, like people don't want to necessarily be invited to an activity or a service or a space because, you know, we're telling them that they are isolated, or that they're disconnected and they need to make connections with different people. They like to come to a space where they feel they can just be themselves. And I think one of the really sort of powerful things that's come up already, I think someone was talking about just a space to have a cup of tea earlier, but using food as a vehicle to create connection, it came up in one of the videos we saw as well, is really, really powerful. And it's just almost a tool to bring together, because, you know, we know that as soon as you do bring people together and allow that space for conversation, that a lot of these barriers and prejudices do break down. And it's just actually getting people together in a space where they have the time to sort of build understanding and empathy. So yeah, doing it by stealth, which might feel a bit sinister, but I think it's probably about right.
Thank you so much, Ben. I'm really delighted that Sale has actually managed to rejoin us. So Sale, if you'd like to put your camera on, that would be great.
I'm not going to risk it, Jo, because I think the internet connection is quite bad, and I think we might lose it again.
Okay, well, I wonder if you would like to just, I mean, if you perhaps could just give us the short version of your response to the paper, because there's some great questions, and I think your perspective on some of those questions will be really helpful. So as we've moved into the Q&A, would you like to just take sort of 3 or 4 minutes just to give us your short response to the paper, and then we'll carry on with the Q&A.
Yeah, I can do, John. Apologies for colleagues waiting for me to come on and present to you. So I will keep it quite short and simple. And I think the report itself, I do welcome it and its findings, as I feel that it recognises the challenges faced by local authorities and how local networks have stepped up to support local needs. Kindness is key to recognising the needs of individuals, and I've seen it over the last 15 months working in Coverdale that local communities have a desire, and local networks, including the voluntary sector and faith sector, have supported local mechanisms by showing warmth and care. And this has truly been overwhelming. And the report's also acknowledging that these projects are critical to the delivery of our local initiatives in our local areas. In Coverdale, we've been quite fortunate that the leadership in the council has allowed local involvement to be connected in the delivery of our services. And we've moved now away from the local authority delivering some of the food parcels to our local networks, including Coverdale Community Cares, who has been supported by the voluntary sector and the local authority in delivering that provision, because it's probably far more easier for local communities working in local areas delivering that mechanism. Some of these practical examples have really fruition over the years. One of the initiatives that I'll briefly talk about is something called Eat Together, Stay Together, and that's through Coverdale Community Cares. It's providing an opportunity for members of our community to actually have a virtual dinner. So someone signs up to coming together, and I think I probably missed some of the presentations that talk about providing the inspiration and the confidence for individuals who've possibly been indoors for the last 15 months, not being able to go outside because they're either self-isolating or they've been advised to stay indoors to protect themselves. And I think these opportunities working together takes away the biggest concept that I think is of concern is mental health. And the report kind of touches upon that. There's colleagues that I speak to on a day-to-day basis talking about they've not left their home for the last 15 months. They're not too sure that they can actually go out in that confidence and whether they're going to be kept safe if they do leave that home. So we've got a lot of work to do around building that capacity of mental health and well-being. The other example that I'd like to share is a very local project, which is called Halifax Community Cares, Halifax Community Fridge, and that's been established on the local mosque in Halifax, where at present up to 60 people come every single day to the community fridge and take away food of their choice. And it's good to see that people have now created new friendships. It's broken down barriers in that local area because the area is predominantly from the BAME Muslim community. And what we are seeing is that people are becoming far more cohesive. They're talking to each other, new friendships being created, and people are hopefully working together with that one aim. And I think the report itself acknowledges that partnerships are stronger when there is a common goal. And that common goal is to hopefully support our local communities. And I feel many barriers have been taken away, broken down in terms of the culture and customs. Race has not played a role in the mindsets of how these services have been delivered. And I believe Coverdale has become a stronger place that has established strong links between the faiths, the business and the voluntary sector. So I think this work that's been created over the last 15 months is something that we feel in Coverdale we can work upon and hopefully break down them barriers further.
That's brilliant, Sale. Thank you so much. When I was reading through some of the qualitative interviews, I was really struck by the responses from Calderdale, and there was a real sense that the community was the council and public services, and the public services and the council was the community. It was sometimes really hard to work, with others. I could sort of see, who was a local authority key worker maybe, and who was a resident. But it was very hard to tell with Calderdale. It just felt that there was that real sense of just working alongside each other, hand in hand. that came through really strongly in a lot of the qualitative research that I read through for Beyond Us and Them. So it's really good to have you here. There's a really great question which I'd love to ask the panel. It's basically, there are many distressing and violent conflicts taking place across the world. And how can radical kindness play a positive role if and when these international issues intrude into our local communities in a potentially divisive way? And I think, you know, we've seen some of that over the last week or so with the anti-Semitic comments being shouted and out of a car in I think in London, and other things that have gone on across the country. So I think it is the juxtaposition of, you know, sometimes what we see on our TV news is sort of heartbreaking. And where does radical kindness fit within that? How can it play a role when those things are also such a large part of our consciousness and lives? Can I start off with you, Sale? Is that okay on that question? How do you work with that practically within Calderdale Council?
Yeah, I think it's a very valid question to be asked, and I think it's pertinent with the current conflict in Palestine and Israel. And I think it's important that we as the local authorities in the areas that we're working understand the dynamics, looking at both sides of the issues that are presenting, because you've got communities at the moment that feel quite hurt by the way that media is reporting on the conflict in Gaza and Israel. People talking about the differences of oppression, it's talking about genocide taking place. And I think across the areas, we've got to recognise that we've got to allow individuals to have that space to express that opinion, as long as it doesn't fall into incitement and hate crime. And you've talked about, Joe, in terms of the anti-Semitic incidents. And I think it's going to be a challenge over the next few days or weeks, unless the conflict stops, because you've got communities who are actually galvanizing together. I'm sure across the other authority areas, they are probably seeing day by day more and more protests taking place. Majority of these protests are very peaceful, and I think the wider community in the UK are recognising that there is a passion and a drive to hopefully ask our leadership in terms of the government to step in and stop this conflict taking place. And I think if you look at it, history keeps on repeating itself. And I think in terms of social cohesion, COVID-19 has brought about communities coming together, sharing their resources, working together with a common goal. And it's unfortunate at the moment within the context of Israel and Palestine that if we're not too careful, that may then put us back again a couple of years, and then we'll have to rebuild that relationship again, because I think mistrust within government and local areas might rebuild back in again. So there are challenges, and I think we've got to be open with the approach. We've got to have good conversation around what's right and what's wrong, and we've got to be honest about our opinions and not be scared of actually expressing them, as long as we're not going to be insightful to either side of the conflict.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess, you know, I think that it's always been the way that international, national, you know, events do intrude on relationships in local places. It's inevitable that it does. But I guess I think the role that radical kindness plays is that if you've got radical kindness in that local place, if people have those strong interconnections, those strong intergroup relations, then you know, people can then sort of kind of act together. That provides some resilience to divisions, kind of, you know, driving a wedge between groups at a local level. So I think, you know, that knowing each other and understanding each other across difference can really provide some resilience to some of those pressures when they do come, and it's inevitable, I think, that they do come. Ruth, I don't know whether you've got thoughts about this.
No, I think I would agree with what both you and Sel have said. I think what radical kindness can bring is an understanding of the fact that, you know, it isn't individuals in our communities causing these conflicts, and it isn't, you know, it isn't Jewish people in North London that are to blame for what's going on in Palestine and Israel, and we can often see a kind of bigger picture in an international context and lose that kind of individual person-centered perspective, I think. And so knowing people from different groups, I think, is fundamentally important in how we create resilient communities.
Yeah, thank you for that. That was a great question. We've got one final question which I'd just like to ask, which is about, which I think Ben alluded to, and I think it would be great to hear from Kaya as well, because Kaya's been very involved in the Beyond Us and Them research. Very interesting comments on making spaces and places for radical kindness. Would be good to hear panelists' thoughts on this. How important are physical spaces for people to come into contact with each other across difference, especially in our currently socially distanced lives? So perhaps if I could ask each panelist just to kind of limit themselves to around about a minute on this, that would be great. But if we come to Ben and Kaya first.
I've got lots more to say than 60 seconds worth, but no, I think they're really, really important, and I think they're still important, even though we, yeah, as you sort of mentioned the question, like we've been cut off from some of them over the last bit of time. But I think I've also noticed in certain places us kind of like behaving in our neighborhoods in different ways. And like if you take it back to a year ago, you know, we had all of the kind of messages in windows and chalk on pavements and just all of those kind of little demonstrations of community and connection that are very much about the way we interact with place and space. So I think, and then again, you know, the examples that you've seen about using kind of digital spaces as well in the report are really, really important. And I think we just need this kind of like broad mix of them. I suppose I would sort of make it as a final thing a pitch for kind of valuing those in between spaces as well, which can quite often get crowded out, and there can be just as much value as in the sort of conversations that you have over the garden fence or at the bus stop or when you go to the shop as there are in the community centre and the public library, and those are the ones that quite often get squeezed out because we can't sort of measure their value in quite the same way as we do with those kind of like formalized and structured activities as well. And I think all kinds of places and spaces for people to come together are valuable and important.
That's great, Ben. And People United will tell you that actually there is some good research on the impact of those micro connections. Somebody called Barbara Fredrickson in the States has done some work around that, and they really impact the vagus nerve, which connects the heart and the brain. So anyway, I'll leave you to search People United's website, but they've got some good research on that. Kaya.
Yeah, I completely agree with Ben that any way that we can find to come together and connect is productive and helpful. I mean, I think in the Beyond Us and Them research, we've heard of all these really like innovative ways of people coming together despite being physically distanced. So I think Sale just mentioned, you know, a virtual cook-in or socially distanced coffee mornings, just lots of like lovely examples of people finding ways to connect. But I do agree also that one of the major challenges going forwards is going to be those people who are really isolated and who are really scared to go back into society still. And that is something that's come up repeatedly in the research, is that there are people who are very, very afraid and really do lack confidence to leave their houses. And I think it's how we connect with those people again and how we kind of make them feel safe and secure and confident and able to go back into society. So yeah, I think that's what I would say on that question.
Thank you, Kaya. And then maybe if we could just have sort of 20 seconds or so from Sale, Ruth and Chrissy. Sale, would you like to go first?
Yeah, I think again, Ben and Kai's point's pertinent, and I think social interaction is important. But again, what we're going to look at is the digital technology isn't everyone's cup of tea, like I experienced this morning. So we've got to look at, you know, obviously getting people skilled up to use that. And a quick example that I'd like to share is we did a virtual iftar for Ramadan, which we did in 2 areas, and that was really quite different, having a snack together, talking about Ramadan, etc. So we are looking at moving forward is to do more interactive work, and there was around 70 people that signed into it, quite a good number, looking at new technology. So I think we've got to look at the bigger picture. But I think Kaya Spont is right, that there are people at the moment that may be suffering from health and well-being, mental health, that we've got to connect to, otherwise we will miss out those that we need to connect to whilst we're doing the Live Now work that we're doing.
Ruth.
So I agree with everything that's been said at community level. The only thing I would add is I think there's something about, as I was saying in my response, about civic pride and pride in a kind of wider place that we saw certainly in Hull and other cities that have had an event designation, and really important to understand that that different groups feel proud of their place and feel a connection and sense of belonging to their place, and how we make that that a more community focused feeling.
Chrissy for the final comment.
So I wanted to pick up on what Kaya was saying about those that have been isolated and how we might invite and bring them into a space, but also that we have this virtual space now that actually is new for many people. And I think we can still use that and slowly pull people out. And also we've got street spaces, park spaces, all these spaces we've made use of over this time, actually, that I'm hoping will continue. Maybe we can be creative with those.
Yeah, absolutely. Think about being creative and innovative. I think we're going to continue to need to be that in the next few years. So huge thanks to Ben, Ruth and Sale, and thank you for bearing with us through the technical difficulties. Thank you, Kaya and Chrissy. And thank you really to everybody, the individuals, organisations, businesses, institutions that have shared their stories with us, and in their own way are influencing their street, community, workplace and local area to foster those deep, meaningful connections in pursuit of a kinder, fairer British society. So thank you to you for all of your wonderful acts of radical kindness. Please do carry on sharing the stories and sharing the paper, and thank you once again.